All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Azizi podcast. And my guest today is a very exciting guest, Joelle Weir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
It's such a pleasure for me as well, and it's one of my favorite type of podcasts because it's with the guests that I've just met randomly, like was at one of the networking events, and we kind of hit it off and talked a little bit more about what we do and what's our professional background and all. And I felt like this would be a great opportunity for us to share these experiences with the audience as well. We've met at the Rise in STEM event just a couple of weeks ago here in Toronto. And yeah, that's how we kind of met. And one thing that I really, really enjoyed listening when you talked about yourself is the fact that you have a podcast. Um, and that's something that resonated with me as well. So I will give the floor to you to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about yourself so that the audience kind of like knows your background more, and then we can dive into it uh, deeper. So Joelle, who you are, what do you do, what are you working on, and anything else you want to say.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Joelle Weir, but I actually go by Joelle Alexandria for my podcast using my
Ooh, I
middle
love
name.
that.
I guess it's like I have like a stage name and like a real thing. So I just
Should have
decided to do that.
so I should have introduced you as Joelle Alexandria.
No, it's okay. Well, I won't hold it against you. Not this time.
Okay. So, but in the future, right, and when we do another episode, I will say Joelle Alexandria.
Oh, yes, more episodes. I like it. I like that. Like,
Yeah.
you're future focused. Yeah. So my name's Joelle Weir, or AKA Joelle Alexandria, and I have a podcast called The Future for Us, where I do audio journalism and storytelling through narration and a lot of playing with like scoring and sounds. I do interviews as well with guests, usually about like in the environmental side, like environmental journalism, if they work in the field, or social journalism, where it's just my friends or people in the industry, journalism industry, talking about um, political events that have happened. Like I interviewed Dr. Gavin Tolometti. So that was kind of like the environmental and science side of journalism, where he was talking about the innovations in space and how we can use them for environmental remediation, and a lot of how those two fields like intersect with each other. I also did some interviews with a few other journalists, and my most recent interview was with David. Oh my gosh, I can't. Do I
It's
even remember who I interviewed?
it's all good. I have those memory holes all the times. I'm very bad with names, but I'm good with
Okay,
faces though.
okay, I'm literally on my Spotify right now. Like, who did I interview?
I can totally relate. I interviewed so many people. Sometimes I completely forget. I go through the previous episodes sometimes, and I'm like, oh wow, I had no idea. Like I completely forgot that I spoke to that person.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's very bad. Okay,
especially
so
because you had your podcast for like the past like I would say 4 years, right? It's like it's been around.
yeah,
It's been a minute.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I found it. Nick DiCarlo. So he's a climate advocate in Toronto. I interviewed like a band, which was pretty cool. Sweezy and the
Ooh.
Disco Punk. Sorry, Sweezy and the Disco Punk. They're like a new kind of indie rock band.
Okay, I have a question with that for later. I'll start with the
Okay,
journalist, but yeah, that's an interesting one.
but let me not go through my whole list. But like, I interviewed a lot of people that I realized, oh wow, like I interviewed more people from diverse backgrounds than I even realized. So yeah, I just do science, social journalism, and environmental journalism. And a bit about me is I started out going to school at the University of Toronto for journalism in 2019. And I liked my experience a lot, like going to school, learning about journalism, what's the truth, like the burden of proof, all of that stuff, what makes a journalist, what doesn't make a journalist. And then 2020 happened, the pandemic, and it was just really negative. I didn't really like the journalism industry at all. I did work in the journalism industry as a freelance writer a little bit, and I found that it wasn't as creative as I thought it would be. Because, like, I'm sorry, let me turn this on.
All good.
Yeah, mute that. Sorry. So I thought that because in school we learn about journalism and it's more like writing classes and thinking and philosophy, and it's like, oh, this is so nice. When you apply it to the industry, it's very fast paced, it's very quick, the 24/7 news cycle, it's very much just pumping out as much information as you possibly can, monetizing it, and then like doing it all again. So I didn't appreciate that, but I did decide to continue doing journalism on the side with my own independent projects. I've done a podcast before called 6 Feet Apart, and that's with other students at the University of Toronto. And we talked about how the pandemic was influencing our lives. And then I branched off from that and did my own podcast, The Future for Us. And I never looked back, and it's almost 4 years, so I'm happy.
That's amazing. And to be honest, I can't imagine being a student during the pandemic. I mean, the things that you folks missed out on, I guess, with like in-person interaction and all of that. I haven't, no clue how this is gonna affect the world in the future, but it's really sad. But at the same time, it gave us a lot of outlets to talk about, it's kind of digitized us even more, which is hopefully a good thing. Um, and honestly, like when you've mentioned that you've interviewed journalists, I feel like that's so intimidating because you are interviewing basically a professional interviewer.
Yeah.
And how did you like that experience? Was that something like that was scary for you? Or because it would be scary for me to actually like interview, like if like I don't know, just like interviewing a professional interviewer, that's like I feel like you'd be judged all the time. I don't know. How was your experience?
Yeah, I guess it was pretty interesting because I feel like journalists nowadays, they have that media literacy and like online component about them. So when you're seeing someone's Instagram and you reach out to them being like, "Oh, I see you're a journalist with the the Daily, is it the Globe and Mail? The
Daily
Daily
Mail, Globe. I think there's a lot of those.
A lot of those, like, oh, you work for this independent news source, or you
Yeah.
work for this big like news production in Toronto.
Hmm.
Can I interview you? And when you go to their Instagram, I feel like it's less of a pressure, I guess, when I just reach out and DM them. Sometimes they
Hmm.
respond, sometimes they don't. But then when you say, okay, let me research this person and see what they did, and they got awards, they got accolades, they've interviewed major players, major like just people in tech, people, artists. They just talked to like really big names and wrote about really important stories. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I wonder if this is enough. But I can't really think like that anymore. It's not good to compare yourself.
That's
And
true. That's true.
yeah, I think they do appreciate helping independent journalists, or I guess independent artists too. And I think it's kind of fun. Like more than anything, it's really fun to just talk to people. That's all. Well, I can't speak for them, but that's all I wanted to do. Just talk to people, find out stories, share them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can relate to that as well. And it's funny that you mentioned reaching out to people on Instagram. So that's something that I do professionally as well for my business. I'm lead searching, I'm trying to get leads to get clients and all of that, recruiting and stuff like that. So what was that experience for you to kind of like reach out to a bunch of strangers randomly on Instagram trying to like pitch your idea and pitch your podcast?
Yeah, I think you have to do like your research as well and kind of fine tune your pitch for them, because you can't just be like, "Hi, my name's so and so. I'm doing this podcast. Do you want to be on it? The episode's about this." You have to kind of like meticulate your interaction so it's like, "Oh, hi, I've seen that you've done this." So like making it so that it's okay. Immediately, it's like, okay, this is something that they've done, and you're
Hmm.
recognizing them for doing this
Interesting.
one
Okay.
thing.
I
And
love
then
that.
it's like, oh, by the way, I also would like to talk about this on my podcast. So it's kind of like
Hmm.
how you rearrange the sentence to be like, instead of it's like, hi, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I want to interview about, it's more like, I like what you do, this is what I think the interview should be about, and also this is who I am. Kind of reversing that to like grab their attention and be like, okay, so she's seen my work, she's familiar with what I do, this is how it actually connects, it's not like random, and then this is who she is, right? And then like I have all my
Right.
I have my network that can vouch for me too.
And it should be like in a short kind of like a paragraph, I would assume. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to like make it like so it's like super super long. So she's like, okay, this is my life story. Even though I'm tempted to, but I have to really fine tune and be strategic. Because sometimes you get one shot. Because if
Mhm.
you send stuff to them and they don't respond, then it's like, okay, if you're gonna send another thing, it's like a less likely they're gonna respond to you, because like
Yeah.
they already don't know who you are. They probably already saw it, and now it's like they wrote you off a little bit.
Hmm.
So now you have to like come strategically.
Plus, lately Instagram got this feature where you just have literally one shot and one opportunity to just uh, direct message them, but then you cannot do it again. Like it's just like, oh,
Oh,
okay, like we'll wait until they reply to you, and then we can open it up for the conversation. Which I feel like it does make sense, but it's definitely it's not good for the like lead gen, for example. And then I noticed in your podcast, Joel, like the production was so great, is so great, and I think you were like, especially with the latest one, you were doing them in person. And I
yeah.
was wondering, how's that experience? Like, how did you figure out the studio thing? The studio, I'm like asking just for myself personally because I'm really curious about that. What was it like to like invite guests over to like a studio and just like the whole logistics of it?
Yeah, so interesting. Finding a studio is something that I guess like I never really thought about until after the pandemic, where I was like, oh, it would be fun to have it in person or have a space where it looks professional. And I found, well, I didn't find it. I actually know the person who runs the studio. It's called Black Space Studios, and it's run by an awesome producer named Ryan Reed. He's pretty cool. So he runs that studio, and I reached out to him, and I knew him already. So I reached out to him, and I was like, oh, can I have this amount of studios time? And then he was like, he gave me that quote, and I was like, okay, perfect. And the first interview I did there was actually someone interviewing me, but I put the episode on my podcast as well to be like, oh, if you want to get to know me, this is someone else coming on my platform to interview me.
Right.
So it was kind of like pretty, pretty awesome to do that. And
Yeah.
I've used them afterwards a couple of times, and it's been pretty good. And they're in Toronto on Queen Street. And then also um, the uh, what's it called? It's like One Squared Productions.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
I want to get the name right because I know because I gave you the
Right, we talked to the person and I think they have an event on July 4th.
yeah, I won't be there. I'll be so sad, but
I think I'm gonna go. We can
yeah, you
follow that
should.
as well.
It's pretty cool. And I love how like they are able to bring all the change makers.
Yeah.
Oh, A Squared Productions. Yes, A Squared
And
Productions.
and the guy's name is Arya, I believe.
Yeah, run by yeah, Arya Ashuri. Yeah. He's pretty cool. I've come to him with a couple of ideas too, so maybe I'll use them in the future. Yeah, it's just all about I think when you're in an artist space, because I feel like when you think of journalists, you don't really think of artist. But if you think of an independent journalist and how they have to write, record, produce, edit, do
It's a
their own
lot of
like
work.
research,
Yeah.
it is like an art project. So when you reach out
Hmm.
to other artists, and like look for collaboration, there's always like love and support in that community, so I
Yeah,
appreciate
because you're producing, right? At the same time, you're not just a talent on camera or on the microphone. At the same time, you have to do the whole production. And that's why I feel like a lot of people who want to start a podcast or thinking about it, they don't realize like there's a lot of behind the scenes that's going on. Even hosting a podcast is like a little thing. Um, but yeah, and my other question is when you mentioned the interviewing the band, how did that happen? Can you tell me more about like the logistics of that? When you say band, does that mean that you actually interviewed like several people at once? Like, what was that about?
So the band is two, so it's called Sweezy and the Disco Punk, and they're like a rock alternative independent band. I didn't interview them in person though; it was on Zoom. But like the video is on the podcast because on Spotify you can like upload videos too. So yeah, the video's there, and I knew actually it was interesting. I knew the lead singer from university because he was also in my journalism program.
Oh,
He does
nice.
not do journalism anymore. So I think it's just interesting. I like how journalism it teaches you to like think inquisitively. Nobody has to be a journalist if they want to pursue journalism, just like nobody has to if you want to learn about journalism, you don't have to be a journalist. You know, you can do any field. But yeah, he's a singer, and I met him through school. And then I reached out to him on Instagram, and I was like, "Hey, I'd love to interview your band because I see you have an album coming out. So let's get it done." So he was just very supportive of
That's
that.
great. Yeah, it's funny because when I interview several people at once, like two or three, usually two people, it's challenging because you want to make sure you give time to each participant equally, and you have to make sure that it's kind of like you don't just ask a question, you ask a question and then you kind of like call on the person, like which person do you want to reply first, because there's this tendency for people to be polite and just like not interrupt and not start first. So like this like a little pause happens, So those are the things that I'm constantly thinking about when I'm interviewing several people at once. It's just like, okay, I have to like operate it. I have to be like in charge and letting, it's kind of like moderating in a way. But it's a such a different, it's such a different vibe from just interviewing like one person. You have to operate. You have to make sure that logistically it's working, and you're thinking like, because you are your own producer, right? So you have to make sure you give yourself some sort of a guidance. But I don't know. It's just like such a crazy experience, and I feel like it's very useful too. I believe I'm not a journalist per se, although maybe I am in a way because I am interviewing people. But who knows? I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't dare to call myself a journalist. I'm a podcaster. But it is useful for other things. You know, it's useful for talking to people in life, in real life. It's useful for like online interviews and things like that, for job interviews. So speaking of professions, right? Journalism, especially independent journalism, you've mentioned, you know, you have to monetize that as an independent journalist. And I just wanted to like ask, like, what is the thought process when it comes to monetization? Obviously, everyone has to get paid. You know, if you're working, you have to be compensated for that. But for a journalist to be paid, especially the professional independent journalists, what are the key aspects of making sure that the content is monetizable, in your opinion?
Yeah, in my opinion, I haven't gotten monetized in terms of AdSense because you know, like when you go on YouTube or any streaming platform, the amount of people who come can determine if you're getting paid or not. And then the more people that come, the more you get like AdSense based on like how many people view it. So it has to be like a big number though. Like I think for Spotify, you're only monetized if you have at least like 10,000 streams for
Wow.
sure. So, but then there's also things because people don't really think about it like that. They're like, oh, I'm not big yet. I can't get monetized. But it's not just about like the bigger streams, it's about your influence. So, like, people are looking for micro influencers now. Like, if you're producer or content creator or anything, and there's a local business that's like, hey, you get a lot of reach in this town, why don't we collaborate and you endorse us and we'll give you some money for it, and then you just have to promote it um
Hmm.
on your podcast or wherever and just say like who's endorsing you,
Right.
where what the product is, whatever. And when it comes to journalism, there's also like that like ethical sense of it
Right.
where
There's a
it's like,
fine line, and it's like, who do you
yeah, it's like
endorse? And
someone,
you have to make sure they know that it's paid, like stuff like that.
yeah, but also making sure it doesn't influence the story either. Like
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
were to, if you're doing a story about, I don't know, about like maybe like the health crisis in
Hmm.
Western nations, and then you're getting a sponsorship by Little Debbie's or like McDonald's or somewhere like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like, okay, by the way, it's sponsored. I don't. I think people would see the irony in that, but I think there's a place for getting monetized and still speaking the truth. I don't think it has to be, oh, like, oh, you're a sellout for doing this or you're like terrible for doing that. As long as you're being transparent about it, I don't see anything wrong because people definitely have to get paid. Other ways of doing it is like crowdfunding. So you can tell your audience, hey, if you like my work so much, please pay me. Or like there's websites like Buy Me a Coffee where it's like people can send you money for a coffee, like 250, whatever the standard coffee is. You don't have to use it for a coffee, but you use it to like fund
Right.
your
It just gives the listener or the user kind of like an understanding. We're not asking for like arm and a leg, but you can donate a little bit, you know, we can at least
yeah.
like get a coffee for that.
Yeah,
Um,
true. And then also Patreon too. People do like behind the scenes stuff with that. And it's just really creative ways to like try to fund your art or fund your, yeah, I guess art. Yeah.
art, profession, um, just like livelihood, I guess, right?
Yeah.
You know, in the professional journalism, I mean, journalism is such a fast-paced profession because there are stories every day, and currently people have such a short attention span, and they're always looking for more. They're scrolling, they're looking for something interesting, they're looking for something to like read about, and what it's like right now to be in that field where you have to make sure that I'm assuming that you have to be searching for stories every day. How is that something that is really pressuring? I would feel like it's really stressful for a journalist to go hunt for a story, and then once it's done, you cannot take a break, you hunt for another one.
Yeah, that exactly. That's why I decided not to pursue journalism full time, and I only focus on stories about like social, environmental, and science journalism. So that's like my niche, and anything else I can just pass by and be like, "Wow, that was a good story." I don't have to speak on it, you know. Finding my voice means I don't feel pressured to talk about every single little thing, because the more you branch yourself out, I feel like the more you're not really grasping what like the depth of a story. Because for me, when I post a podcast or an episode, it usually takes me like 3 months because I do long form journalism. So I'm
Right.
researching, okay, what's the outcome of this, interviewing people, um, giving some like narration about it and like some background so that it's not just like hastily put together.
Yeah, it's very well produced. As I told you, like on the phone when we spoke, I felt like I was listening to an NPR produced podcast. You know, it's just like such a great like. There's like an introduction, there's a hook, and then there's go back to that, and there's like the music and all that. It's just like I was like a little bit like, oh man, like I don't do that at all. Like I really should like employ like engage in something similar. You know what I mean?
I mean, there's room for all different styles. Like I think I definitely took what um I think I definitely took that style from like things that I've seen, like whether it's a YouTuber or like the news. But I think yeah, like doing long form journalism is really fun because you get to dive into that story and really analyze it and dissect it and then spit it back out and see what people think and then have engagement, right? And talk more about it. And it doesn't just pass you by. It like lingers a little bit. So I appreciate that. And the human aspect of it as well is what makes the story linger and not have that you don't have that short attention span.
Absolutely. And do you think the independent journalism is on the rise right now, given that we're living in the age of social media, that everyone has a microphone, everyone has a camera, everyone has a distribution network right now through social media. Where do you see this going? And how do you see this reflect on mainstream journalism, right? The corporate journalism, I would say, like newspapers and like news outlets and stuff.
I definitely think news outlets are trying to catch up more now, especially when it comes to stories that are very prevalent online. And I definitely appreciate that because we need to disrupt having that center of
Centralized, I would say.
yeah, like yeah, centralized news source where it's like the three big like news broadcasts, or at least in America, it's like, you know, Fox, CNN,
Hmm.
MSNBC, and then like everybody else, right? But now that we're decentralizing it, we have more people maybe focused on crime analytics, and that's their niche, and they can do a really, really good job on that because that's the only thing they're talking about, you know? With like these big conglomerates, it's like, oh, you're putting more stories on this, you're putting more emphasis on this and that and this and that, and they can still get the story wrong. Like I realize now it's like you look at the news, it's like these are just people, like same as like an independent journalist. These are just a multitude of people kind of like, you know, producing content, doing the same thing as one person, only just they have more capacity to do more of it. And they still can get the story wrong. And I feel like journalism, it's very interesting. It's about talking to people, it's about um like interviewing people, but like maybe they don't have their finger on the pulse in terms of what stories are hitting the public more because they're they're so focused on maybe like getting like the big grand scheme of things like elections or like just like foreign policy, maybe about like a lot of political stuff. But it's like, what about the small things? What about how, I don't know, what's an example? What about like the gang violence that's going on right now in places like Scarborough or Rexdale? And not like that those are the only places, but those are the stories that I've been seeing a lot. What are the implications of that towards youth? And I know they do cover that as well, but like maybe like a deep dive into like why people are kind of like are moving more towards violence in these communities. I guess there's no like, I mean, I guess like because with journalism it's who, what, where, when, why, so you have the five, where, when, why, yeah, you have the five,
Yeah.
but like the why isn't really like being analyzed as much. So I think yeah, we're moving more towards independent journalists, even like YouTubers that do like content, and they don't even have to be like journalists. They talk about like long form content, like, oh, why was Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse so great, and they have this whole dissertation about like the character analysis, the themes, the philosophy,
I
the
love
behind
that movie,
the
by the
scenes.
way.
I do. I love it too. I can't wait for the next one. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's just people get to be creative with what they think is important. And now we're seeing a lot of things that are, well, not everything can be important, but to you, like what's important to you, and you're able to search that out and find someone who can talk about it. So I think the tides are definitely changing. Independent journalism's on the rise, and independent content creation is on the rise, which is pretty important.
definitely. And one of the issues that you chose to cover is in environmentalism. And I was wondering, how did you come to this decision to cover environmentalism, and what are the best parts about it, but most importantly, what are the hard parts about it as well, so that people who want to do the same kind of like come prepared.
Mhm. Yeah, I I think I've always been like an environmentalist at heart, and I in high school I was part of my school's environmental club, and I really liked that a lot. And then I tried to do my part just to be environmentally friendly, I guess. Do your part, reduce, reuse, recycle. Some people like to take cold showers. Some people are vegetarian or vegan. Some people don't like take a car, they take the bus to work. Like every little bit helps. And then I was like, okay, I'll still do that, but I'll also do journalism. Then when journalism didn't work out, I was like, oh, I should probably go to like what I first initially liked, which was chemistry, but more specifically environmental chemistry. So I'm actually in school for environmental chemistry right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I think I've always just cared about the environment and wanted to do my part. And then doing the journalism actually helped me realize that I want to make more of an impact in this industry rather than just talking about the people who are polluting it or talking about the people who are saving it. Like I want to be a part of the people who are saving it. So I decided to be the change I wanted to see in the world, but still do journalism. And something that's great about it is that I get to talk to people who are change makers in Toronto, not just in Toronto, but um, like maybe who are based in Toronto, and like ask them questions about what they think policy policymakers should or shouldn't be doing, social initiatives. A lot of it is, I guess, interrogating whether it's, is it like our fault, the consumers, or is it the corporations that are doing the harm? I think in any case, it's definitely both. I think like, oh, for the early in the early 2000s, it was mostly like, oh, do your part, like reduce, reuse, recycle. But now we're realizing that, oh, but corporations are gonna just pollute no matter what. So it's up to us to like bankrupt them and harm it where it hurts them, which is in their pockets, right? But then it's kind of switching now where I'm realizing, wow, there's a lot of consumption going on, like a lot of things that are ingrained in our society, like, oh, you're going out, you have to buy a new dress or buy a new outfit or whatever, when you have things that are perfectly okay in your wardrobe, but it's like, oh, someone's seen it on me before.
Mhm.
um what are other things like overconsumption when it comes to maybe technology, computers, phones, like always having like the next new thing. And of
Yeah, the
course, like,
lithium batteries and stuff.
yeah, but it's not like it's interesting because I realize now it's not just the consumer's fault. It's also like kind of like the society we live in. But then who's a part of our society? Us. It's
Right.
it's kind of like there's a lot of moving parts in
So
it,
it's like a
and
consumer culture,
yeah,
right? Like
consumer
it contributes
culture.
to that.
Yeah, but also like a culture of greed and capitalism too.
Hmm.
Because like if a company can, like for example, Nestle can go and like hoard water resources for their manufacturing of different products that they sell in the U.S. Well, they sell everywhere, but like mostly sell to consumers in the U.S. and Canada. And it's like, what about the people who need water there? But then we're the one in demand for the products. But then the way like business works is you can create a company and then manufacture the need for it, right? To get like a lot of money. And I don't know, like the way I think about it, it's definitely like a lot of like give and take regarding the climate crisis and environmentalism. So the good part is that, sorry about that. The good
Okay.
part is that I can be a part of the change while still reporting on it on my own free time and really focusing on where I think the the focus needs to be. The bad part of it is when you think about like the climate crisis and climate anxiety and how people feel about climate change and how it impacts their lives. There's a lot of like doomsday ideas where it's like, oh my gosh, in 50 years, will we be able to like walk around and breathe air and enjoy the environment as we used to? Or will it be very dystopian where it's like we have to like watch out for like CO2 pollution, like, oh, there's a warning, there's like a CO2 smog coming this way, which has already happened, like, especially in California and like places where in the summer where a lot of smog passes through. And a lot of that is makes you anxious, it makes you upset, or sorry, it makes me upset and anxious. And it also it's very emotionally taxing as well to think about all these things and worry about it constantly and not seeing any change as of yet.
But I feel like with that being said, like the fact that you're taking action and you're doing something about this is definitely like I think this should be an inspiration to a lot of people because a lot of people are anxious right now and a lot of people are sad, in my opinion. But what, is missing for a lot of people is that kind of like, okay, so how about you do something about it? And even the little thing, even like going out there, even if you like recycle yourself, that already helps. Or you go out there and talk to people. You go out there and spread the message. You go out there and vote for the politician who is supporting, the cause that you feel passionate about. Those are the things that I feel like at least can help people to be a part to feel like they're a part of that and definitely be a part of something bigger, like a change that can come. Um, Joelle Alexandria, we are coming to the end of this amazing interview. I really appreciate you being on this podcast and sharing your story and sharing your experiences. Um, thank you so much. I would love to give the floor to you to kind of promote your current projects and how can people reach out to you and find you.
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on so I'm on Instagram, so a underscore future underscore for FOR underscore us. So a future for us on Instagram, but also I have an email, a future for us 99 at gmail.com. And yeah, you can stream me anywhere, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'm on wherever you stream. And I do have another episode coming out soon. It's about like environmental justice and climate justice, and also climate anxiety, which is what I just talked about. And I'm excited for that. I will be at the climate strike in September. I mean, you probably won't see me, but like I'll just be there interviewing people. I love doing street interviews, so
I
that's really
love
fun.
that. I love that. Street interviews. I love that.
Yeah. And I'll just be like trying to hone in on what I want to achieve in this podcast because I know like the production is something that I've always liked, but it might hinder the content a little bit. So if I'm always focused on the production, making it look nice, does it, I guess, does it interfere with the actual, like what I'm actually talking about? Or should I focus more on, you know, um, the content first, right? So I will be doing more production stuff, but I'll definitely taking the content more seriously. And yeah, reach out to me on any of those platforms. And I appreciated this talk. Thank you so much, Samir.
Of course.
I'm a big fan of Azizi podcast.
Thank you so
Yeah, I
much. I
love
appreciate that.
that.
And I'll drop all the links to your handles and podcast as well in the description of this episode. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to Azizi Podcasts, rated 5 stars, subscribe on YouTube as well. And you can also find this podcast on all the platforms that you're currently listening podcasts on. All right. Thank you so much.